Elena Vasquez stood before the mirror in her quarters, motionless except for the steady rise and fall of her breathing. The reflection staring back at her looked less like a diplomat and more like a piece of history brought to life. Polished silver armor covered her from shoulders to boots, its surface gleaming beneath the soft cabin lights. The metal was old, ancient by modern military standards and practically prehistoric by galactic ones, but Elena cared for it as if it were priceless. Because it was. Her grandfather had worn this armor during the Mars colonial wars. Her father had worn it on the day humanity made first contact with alien life. Now, for the first time, it belonged to her. Carefully, she ran her fingers across the chest plate. Tiny scratches marked the metal. Small dents interrupted its otherwise flawless surface. To anyone else, they were imperfections. To Elena, they were memories. Every mark represented a battle survived, a crisis overcome, or a moment when someone had stood between humanity and disaster. At the center of the armor rested Earth's emblem, a blue and green world encircled by a ring of stars. Not a symbol of conquest. A symbol of perseverance. She fastened the final lock beneath her collar and lifted her gaze to the mirror once more. The woman staring back looked calm, confident, ready. Only Elena knew how hard her heart was beating. Today wasn't just another diplomatic assignment. Today was history. For 50 years, humanity had existed on the fringes of galactic politics, observed, tolerated, occasionally acknowledged, but never truly welcomed. The galactic hegemony had spent half a century treating Earth as little more than a curiosity from a distant corner of space. Now, at last, that was changing. After decades of petitions, negotiations, and political maneuvering, the hegemony had agreed to meet humanity as equals. Or so the official invitation claimed. Elena wasn't naive enough to believe it would be that simple. She picked up her helmet and tucked it beneath one arm before leaving her quarters. Minutes later, the transport ship emerged from jump space. And there it was, Concordia. Elena had seen images before. They hadn't come close to preparing her. The station hung against the stars like an artificial world, enormous beyond comprehension. Vast rings of silver metal surrounded a glowing central core, while thousands of vessels from hundreds of civilizations moved around it in organized streams of light. It wasn't merely a station, it was a statement. A declaration that the galaxy was far larger, older, and more powerful than humanity had ever imagined. Most visitors looked upon Concordia and felt insignificant. Elena looked upon it and felt something else. Determination. Because for the first time in history, humanity wasn't arriving as observers. They were arriving to claim their place among the stars. The station's walls were made of materials that shifted color as she walked past them. Strange symbols glowed in languages she could not read. Other delegates had already arrived. Elena saw the tall, thin figures of the Zarathi moving in perfect formation. Their insect-like bodies clicked as they walked. The Nereid representatives floated in mobile water tanks, their tentacles waving slowly. There were dozens of other species, each wearing what Elena assumed was their version of formal clothing. But Elena's armor made her stand out. Other delegates whispered and pointed as she passed. Some seemed curious. Others looked confused. A few appeared almost amused by what they saw as primitive human customs. Elena carried a simple case in her hands. Inside were gifts from Earth, handmade items that represented different human cultures. There was a carved wooden mask from Africa, a silk painting from China, a piece of jewelry made by Native American craftsmen, and a small guitar crafted in Spain. Each item had been chosen carefully to show the diversity and creativity of humanity. The main ceremony hall was enormous. The ceiling stretched so high that Elena could barely see the top. Hundreds of delegates filled the space, each group keeping to their own section. At the front of the hall stood a raised platform, where the most important representatives would speak. Elena walked toward the human section, her boots making soft sounds on the strange floor. The armor felt heavier than usual, but she stood straight and proud. This was humanity's moment to show they belonged among the stars. Ambassador Zepha of the Veltar Dominion stood near the platform. Alila had read about the Veltar during her preparation for this meeting. They were one of the oldest and most powerful species in the galaxy. Their bodies were made of living crystal that caught and reflected light in beautiful patterns. They had ruled parts of the galaxy for thousands of years. Zephyr was tall even by Veltar standards. Her crystalline body pulsed with soft blue light. When she moved, she made no sound at all. Her face, if it could be called a face, showed no expression that Elena could understand. But her translator device would turn her thoughts into words that humans could hear. Elena approached the Veltar ambassador with respect. She had practiced this moment many times. First, she would offer greetings from Earth. Then, she would present the gifts. Finally, she would express humanity's hope for friendship and cooperation. Ambassador Zephyr, Elena said, bowing slightly, as human custom required. I am Commander Elena Vasquez, representing the people of Earth. We are honored to be here. Zephyr's crystalline form turned toward Elena. For a moment, there was silence. Then the translator began to speak in a cold, mechanical voice. Human, the device said, giving Zephyr's thoughts a voice. Your presence here is noted. Elena smiled, trying to ignore the coldness in those words. She opened her case and carefully removed the wooden mask. Ambassador, I would like to present gifts from our world. These items represent the many cultures of humanity. This mask was carved by skilled artists in Africa, using traditions passed down for thousands of years. She held out the mask, but Zapira did not move to accept it. We have no need for primitive trinkets, the translator said, making Zapira's contempt clear. Your species still wages war with metal shells on your bodies. You bring us carved wood and call it art. Your presence here is tolerated, nothing more. The words hit Elena like physical blows. Around them, other delegates began to notice the conversation. Some moved closer to hear better. Elena felt hundreds of alien eyes watching her reaction. Elena looked at the mask in her hands. It had been carved by a master craftsman who had spent months creating it specifically for this moment. The wood came from a tree that had grown for over a century. The patterns told stories of human history, hope, and dreams. To call it a primitive trinket showed complete lack of understanding or respect. She looked up at Zapira's crystal face. The alien ambassador stood perfectly still, waiting for Elena's response, probably expecting an argument or an apology, or some desperate attempt to explain why the gifts mattered. Instead, Elena carefully placed the mask back in the case and closed it. She set the case on the floor beside her. Then, she began to remove her armor. First came the helmet. Elena pulled it off and set it down gently beside the case. Her dark hair fell around her shoulders. Next came the shoulder guards, each one clanging softly as it hit the floor. The chest plate followed, then the arm guards, then each piece of leg armor. The ceremony hall grew quiet. Delegates stopped their conversations to watch. Even the Zarathi stopped their constant clicking sounds. Elena could feel the weight of every gaze in the room. But she continued her work calmly and quietly. Each piece of armor made a clear ringing sound as it touched the floor. The sounds echoed through the enormous hall like a bell tolling. Elena's hands were steady as she worked. She showed no anger, no sadness, no frustration. Her face remained calm and dignified. When the last piece of armor lay on the floor, Elena stood in her simple military uniform. The dark blue fabric looked plain compared to the ornate clothing worn by other delegates. But Elena stood straight and proud, her shoulders back and her head high. She looked once more at Ambassador Zephyr. The crystal being had not moved during the entire process. Elena picked up her case of gifts, turned around, and walked toward the exit. Her footsteps were the only sound in the hall. Every delegate watched as the human woman walked away from the most important diplomatic meeting in her species' history. She did not run. She did not storm out in anger. She simply walked with quiet dignity toward the door. As Elena reached the exit, she paused for just a moment. Without turning around, she spoke in a clear voice that carried through the silent hall. When you are ready to treat us with respect, she said, you know where to find us. Then she walked through the door and was gone. Behind her, the pile of armor sat in the middle of the ceremony hall, like a monument to something that had just ended before it could begin. The gifts she had brought lay forgotten in their case, and hundreds of alien delegates stared at the empty doorway, trying to understand what they had just witnessed. Ambassador Zapira remained perfectly still, her crystal body reflecting light in patterns that seemed somehow different than before. For the first time in her long life, she had encountered something she did not expect and did not understand. A species that would simply walk away rather than accept disrespect. The ceremony continued, but everything had changed. The other delegates whispered among themselves, asking questions that no one could answer. What kind of species was this? What had just happened? And what would happen next? Elena's empty armor remained where she had left it, a silent reminder that some things could not be taken back once they were lost. The ceremony hall remained silent for long minutes after Elena left. Her armor still lay where she had placed it, piece by piece in the center of the room. The metal caught the strange lights of the station and threw back reflections that seemed to dance across the walls. Ambassador Zephyra had not moved since Elena walked away. Her crystalline body stood like a statue, but the patterns of light inside her crystal form moved faster than usual. This was new territory for the ancient Veltar diplomat. In thousands of years of galactic politics, she had never encountered a response like this. Other delegates began to whisper among themselves. The insect-like Zarathi clicked their mandibles in what Elena would have recognized as confusion. The Nara representative sent rapid color changes across their tentacles, a sign they were talking quickly to each other through their water tanks. "What just happened?" asked Ambassador Thrax of the Kitha Coalition. His reptilian features showed genuine puzzlement. "She simply left. The human abandoned the summit," said another delegate. "But why? We expected argument, demands for apology, or at least some attempt to save face." Ambassador Zephyra finally moved. She turned her crystal head toward the pile of armor. "I do not understand this behavior," she said through her translator. "All species follow the hierarchy. The weak submit to the strong. The primitive defer to the advanced. This is the natural order." But even as she spoke, Zephyra felt something she had not experienced in centuries: uncertainty. Elena's calm dignity, as she removed her armor piece by piece, had been unlike anything in Zephyra's long experience with lesser species. A young Nara delegate named Splash of Starlight spoke up from her water tank. "Perhaps we should learn more about these humans before we continue. Their response suggests we may not understand them as well as we thought." Within hours, research teams from every major species were diving into human history and psychology. What they found surprised them all. The humans had a concept called walking away that seemed central to their culture. When faced with situations they found unacceptable, humans would simply leave, rather than endure disrespect or abuse. They had done this in their personal relationships, in their politics, and even in their wars. During their colonial period, entire groups of humans had left their homelands rather than accept oppression. When their governments became too controlling, humans had fought for independence or moved to new territories. When employers treated workers badly, humans formed unions or found new jobs. When relationships became toxic, humans ended them and started over. This behavior was almost unknown among galactic species. Most aliens either fought until one side won completely, or they accepted their place in whatever hierarchy existed. The idea of simply walking away from a bad situation seemed foreign and almost incomprehensible. But what worried the HFY delegates more was what happened next. 3 hours after Elena left the station, every human ship in HFY space received the same coded message. It was brief and simple. Protocol 7 is now active. Begin immediate withdrawal. Human trade ships changed course and headed for the borders of known space. Human diplomatic missions closed their doors and evacuated their staff. Human military advisors attached to HFY forces quietly packed their equipment and left without explanation. Most disturbing of all, human colonies throughout hegemony space began evacuating. Entire populations loaded onto ships and disappeared into the void between stars. They left behind empty cities, abandoned mines, and facilities that had been producing rare materials the hegemony needed. Within a week, it was as if humans had never existed in galactic civilization. Ambassador Zephyra tried to contact Earth directly. Her messages received only an automated response. "The Terran Federation is currently reassessing its galactic engagement policies. Thank you for your patience on patience," Zephyra said to her aide, a younger named Echo of Crystal. "They speak of patience while abandoning their obligations to the hegemony. Perhaps," Echo of Crystal Song replied carefully, "we should consider that they do not see themselves as having obligations to us. The human Elic one between equals." Zephyr's crystal form pulsed with sharp, angry light. "Equals. They are a young species that barely discovered faster than light travel. We have ruled the galaxy for millennia. How can they consider themselves our equals? But even as she spoke, reports were coming in that made her anger turn to concern. The first crisis came from the mining worlds of the Outer Rim. Human workers had operated the most dangerous mines, extracting rare crystals that powered hegemony technology. They worked in conditions that would kill most other species, and they did it willingly, in exchange for fair payment and respect. With the humans gone, the mines sat empty. Other species could not survive in the toxic environments. The crystal supply began to run short within days. The second problem came from the military. Human tactical advisors had been attached to hegemony forces throughout the galaxy. They were not the strongest fighters or the smartest strategists individually, but they brought something unique to military operations: a willingness to sacrifice themselves to save others. Time and again, when hegemony forces faced desperate situations, it was human soldiers who volunteered for the most dangerous missions. They would charge into enemy fire to rescue wounded aliens, or stay behind to cover retreats that saved thousands of lives. Other species fought bravely for their own people, but humans seemed willing to die for anyone they considered an ally. Now, the military commanders who had relied on human courage and sacrifice found themselves facing new threats without their most dependable soldiers. The third and most serious problem came from the frontier worlds. The Devourers, ancient machines from the dark space between galaxies, had been launching raids against outer colonies for months. The attacks had been manageable because human forces always responded first and fastest to distress calls. Humans had old primitive ships compared to most galactic standards, but they flew them into impossible situations to rescue people they had never met. Human crews would ram their ships into Devourer vessels to stop attacks on alien worlds. They called it their duty to protect those who could not protect themselves. Without human intervention, the Devourer raids became much more successful. Entire colonies fell to the machine invaders. Refugees flooded into hegemony core worlds, telling stories of how human rescue ships had always arrived just in time. Until now, Ambassador Threx of the Kither Coalition called an emergency meeting. Representatives from a dozen species gathered in the same hall where Elena had removed her armor. The pile of human metal still sat where she had left it, untouched by station maintenance crews. "We have a problem," Threx announced. "The human withdrawal is causing cascading failures throughout our territories. Our military effectiveness has dropped by 30%. Critical material supplies are running short. Frontier defenses are collapsing. They are trying to force us to negotiate from weakness," suggested a Zarathi representative. "This is a tactic to gain better terms," but Splash of Starlight disagreed. "I have studied their behavior patterns. This is not a negotiating tactic. They have genuinely withdrawn from galactic civilization. They appear to be done with us." The room fell silent. The concept of being done with the entire galaxy was so alien that most species could not process it. "Where did they go?" asked Threx. "Unknown," replied the Zarathi. "Our long-range sensors show human ships moving beyond the galactic rim into regions we have never explored. They are not hiding. They are leaving entirely." Ambassador Zafira stood and walked to Elena's abandoned armor. She reached out one crystal finger and touched the chest plate with its symbol of Earth. "I begin to understand," she said quietly. "We assumed they needed us more than we needed them. We were wrong." The other delegates stared at her. Zephyra continued, her voice carrying a note they had never heard before, something that might have been regret. "They came to us offering friendship, gifts, and partnership. I treated them as beggars seeking our approval, but they were not begging, they were offering. And when the offer was rejected rudely, they simply took it back." Outside the station's viewing ports, empty space stretched in all directions. Somewhere beyond the edge of known space, humanity was building something new. Without any input from the species that had dismissed them as primitive, the galaxy suddenly felt much larger and much lonelier than it had before. 3 months passed, without any word from humanity. The galaxy felt their absence like a missing tooth, small but impossible to ignore. Elena Vasquez stood on the observation deck of Haven Station, humanity's new home base built in the dark space beyond the galactic rim. Through the transparent aluminum windows, she could see dozens of human ships working to expand their hidden civilization. Some were construction vessels building new habitats. Others were exploration ships mapping the unexplored regions of space. All of them worked with a sense of purpose that had been missing during humanity's time in the hegemony. Status report. Elena said to Captain Marcus Chen, her chief of operations. All human colonies have been successfully evacuated from hegemony space. Marcus replied, reading from his tablet. Total population relocated 400 million humans. Current location classified beyond galactic rim. All strategic resources secured. No casualties reported. Elena nodded. The evacuation had been planned for years, just in case humanity ever needed to disappear from galactic civilization. They called it the Great Withdrawal Protocol. She had hoped never to use it, but Zephyr's contempt had made the choice clear. Any attempts at contact from the hegemony? Elena asked. Daily messages from Ambassador Zapira, all routed to automatic response systems. She seems persistent. Elena smiled without humor. She's probably confused. The Veltar are used to species that fight or submit. They don't understand walking away. Through the station's communication systems came the voice of Dr. Sarah Kim, humanity's chief xenopsychologist. Elena, you need to see the latest intelligence reports from our deep space scouts. The situation in hegemony space is getting worse. Elena made her way to the intelligence center, where large screens showed maps of the galaxy. Red warning symbols marked areas where the Devourers had attacked. There were more red symbols than Elena remembered from 3 months ago. Many more. The machine intelligences are getting bolder, Dr. Kim explained. Without human rapid response teams, the Devourers are taking entire star systems. The hegemony forces are losing badly. Elena studied the tactical displays. The Devourers were ancient machines from the void between galaxies. They consumed planets for raw materials and converted living beings into more machines. For decades, they had been held back by combined hegemony forces, with humans often leading the most dangerous missions. What about space? Elena asked. Dr. Kim pointed to a cluster of blue stars near the galaxy's core. The Devourers launched their first major assault on Veltar territory 2 weeks ago. The crystalline cities on Zephyr's homeworld are under siege. Elena felt a strange mix of emotions. She was not angry at Zephyra anymore. Anger required caring, and Elena had moved beyond that. But she felt no satisfaction in seeing the Villar suffer either. The Devourers were humanity's enemy too. In a perfect world, all the galactic species would be working together to stop them. But this was not a perfect world. Any word from other hegemony species? Elena asked. The Nerid Collective has sent several private messages. Dr. Kim replied. They want to establish separate diplomatic contact with us. The Zarathi have done the same. It seems not all species agreed with how Ambassador Zephyr treated you. Elena walked to the main viewing screen, which showed the distant lights of the galaxy they had left behind. What about casualties? 17 colonies lost completely. Estimated death toll in the millions. The outer rim is basically gone. Elena closed her eyes. Millions of beings dead, because the galactic species could not work together effectively. She knew that human intervention could have saved many of those lives. Human ships were not the fastest or strongest, but human crews never gave up. They would fly impossible missions to save a single civilian, but they could not save people who did not want their help. Ma'am, came a new voice from the communication station. We're receiving a personal message for you. It's from Ambassador Zephyr, but not through official channels. She's using emergency frequencies. Elena considered ignoring it. She had read Zephyr's official messages, formal diplomatic language that showed no real understanding of what had gone wrong. But an emergency frequency meant something different. Put it through, Elena said. The main screen shifted to show Ambassador Zephyr's crystalline form, but something was different. The proud, cold posture was gone. The crystal patterns in her body moved with erratic, almost frantic energy. Behind her, Elena could see smoke and flashing lights, signs of battle. Commander Vasquez, Zephyr said, and her translator did not hide the strain in her voice. I need to speak with you, not as an ambassador to another ambassador, as one being to another. Elena remained silent, waiting. My world is dying, Zephyr continued. The machines have broken through our defenses. Our crystal cities are falling one by one. My people are being converted into devourer units, or used as raw materials. The screen showed brief flashes of the battle raging outside Zephyr's location. Elena could see the geometric shapes of devourer ships firing energy weapons at crystalline structures that cracked and fell like breaking glass. I was wrong, Zephyr said, and those words seemed to cause her physical pain. I was wrong about your people. I was wrong about the gifts you offered. I was wrong about everything. Elena watched the proud alien ambassador struggle with concepts that seemed foreign to her entire worldview. I have spent these months studying your species, Saphira continued. I learned about your concept of respect. I learned about your willingness to sacrifice for others. I learned about your belief that all thinking beings deserve dignity. Another explosion shook Zephyr's location. She steadied herself and looked directly into the camera. I understand now why you removed your armor and walked away. You were not being childish or emotional. You were showing us that we did not deserve the protection and partnership you offered. Elena felt something shift inside her chest. Not forgiveness that would take time, but recognition that Zephyra was finally beginning to understand. What do you want from me? Helena asked. Nothing, Zephyra replied. And that single word carried more weight than all her previous speeches. I do not ask for military aid. I do not demand that you save us. I do not expect you to forget my insults or ignore my failures. She paused as another explosion lit up the background. I ask only for forgiveness. Not because we deserve it, but because I need to know that it is possible to learn from terrible mistakes. Elena looked around the intelligence center. Her staff was watching quietly, waiting for her decision. Through the windows, she could see human ships continuing their work in the dark space beyond the galaxy. Humanity was building something new, something better than what they had left behind, but they were building it alone. Ambassador, Elena said finally, what would you do differently if you had another chance? Zephyr's crystal form seemed to brighten slightly. I would ask your people to teach us about respect. I would study your gift-giving customs before dismissing them. I would remember that age does not always mean wisdom, and that power does not always mean strength. She paused, then added, I would treat you as equals from the beginning, because that is what you always were. Elena made her decision. I cannot speak for all of humanity, she said, but I can offer you something to think about. When this crisis ends, if your people survive it, perhaps we can discuss building something new, not the old hegemony with its hierarchies and dismissals, something based on mutual respect and genuine cooperation. A new kind of galactic community, Saphira asked. Maybe, Elena replied, but only if everyone involved understands that respect cannot be demanded or granted as a favor. It must be freely given and earned through actions, not words. The communication ended as another explosion shook Zephyr's location. Elena stood alone with her thoughts, looking out at the galaxy that had rejected humanity's friendship. Soon, she would have to decide whether humanity should return to help fight the Devourers. But first, the surviving species would have to prove they had learned something from humanity's absence. 1 year had passed since Elena walked away from the Concordia summit. The galaxy had changed dramatically in that time, and not for the better. Elena sat in her command chair aboard the Defiance, humanity's flagship in their hidden fleet beyond the galactic rim. Through the bridge windows, she could see the lights of New Terra, the artificial world humanity had built in the dark space between galaxies. It was beautiful, a blue and green sphere surrounded by massive space stations and defensive platforms. But Elena's attention was focused on the holographic display showing the current state of the galaxy they had left behind. Red zones marked territories lost to the Devourers. There were far too many red zones. Final casualty report from the system, announced Commander Lisa Park, Elena's intelligence officer. The crystal homeworld has fallen. Estimated population loss 8 billion beings. Ambassador Zapira's status is unknown. Elena felt a heaviness in her chest. 8 billion lives lost. She had no love for the arrogant Veltar leadership, but their people did not deserve to die for their leader mistakes. What about the other hegemony species? Elena asked. The Zerathi hive worlds are under siege. The Nariad ocean planets are being drained for raw materials. The Cathar coalition has lost half their territory. Commander Park paused. Elena, the galaxy is losing this war. Through the bridge, speakers came the voice of Dr. Sarah Kim, from the research station. Elena, we're receiving another emergency transmission. This one is different. Show me, Elena said. The main screen shifted to show a figure Elena barely recognized. It was Ambassador Zephyr, but changed beyond belief. Her crystal body was cracked and dim, missing entire sections. One of her arms was gone completely, but she was alive. Behind her stood representatives from dozens of species, Zerathi, Narid, Cathara, and many others. Elena did not recognize. They all looked desperate, defeated, but somehow determined. Commander Vasquez, Zafira said, her voice weak but clear. I speak not as the Veltar ambassador to the hegemony, but as one survivor to another. The hegemony is dead. The old system of hierarchies and dominance has fallen with our worlds. Elena leaned forward in her chair. This was not what she had expected. We who remain have spent this year learning, Zepha continued. We studied human history, human culture, human values. We learned about concepts that were foreign to us: equality, mutual respect, the right of all beings to dignity. One of the Narad representatives whom Milena recognized as Splash of Starlight spoke up. We have voted to dissolve all existing power structures. No more hegemony. No more species ranking. No more assumption that older civilizations are automatically superior to younger ones. A Zerati delegate stepped forward, his insect features showing something that might have been hope. We propose the creation of something new, a galactic cooperative, based on the principles we should have learned from humanity long ago. Elena felt surprise wash over her. This was not a request for military aid, or a desperate plea for rescue. This was something else entirely. What are you asking of us? Helena said. Zephyr's damaged crystal form straightened as much as it could. We ask for your partnership in building something better from the ruins of our failures, not as supplicants to superiors, but as equals, working toward a common goal. The alien delegation waited in silence as Elena considered their words. Around her, the bridge crew of the Defiance watched their commander wrestle with a decision that would affect the future of galactic civilization. The Devourers are still out there, Elena said finally. Even if we work together, the threat remains. Yes, agreed Splash of Starlight, but we have learned something important during this terrible year. The Devourers are not just machines that consume matter and energy. They are the physical manifestation of a philosophy. The belief that only the strong deserve to survive, that the weak exist to be consumed by the powerful. Elena's eyebrows rose. That was a surprisingly sophisticated analysis. The old hegemony operated on similar principles. Sephra admitted, we believed that advanced species had the right to dominate primitive ones. We created a civilization based on hierarchy and fear. In many ways, we were already becoming like the Devourers. The Zerathi delegate made clicking sounds that Elena's translator rendered as agreement. The machines did not corrupt us. They simply revealed what we had already become. Elena stood and walked to the front of the bridge, looking out at the galaxy that had rejected humanity's friendship. And you believe that working together as equals will somehow defeat an enemy that destroyed the hegemony's military? Not just working together, said a new voice. Elena turned to see a small figure step forward from behind the other delegates. It was a member of a species she had never seen before, short, covered in golden fur, with large, intelligent eyes. I am Swifter Runner between stars of the Lightbringer tribes. The being said, my people have been fighting the Devourers for longer than any other species. We have learned that machines cannot understand concepts like sacrifice, loyalty, or love. These things make no logical sense to artificial intelligence. Swiftrunner continued. But humans demonstrated these qualities constantly during their time in our galaxy. You flew impossible missions to save people you had never met. You sacrificed your own resources to help struggling colonies. You offered friendship even to species that treated you badly. Elena felt her heart rate increase as she began to understand where this was leading. The Devourers can calculate military strength, economic power, and technological advancement, Zepha said. But they cannot calculate the power of beings who choose to stand together by choice rather than force. On the screen, the assembled delegates stepped closer together. Elena could see representatives from species that had been enemies for centuries, now standing side by side. The destruction of their old civilization had forced them to find new ways of relating to each other. We are not asking you to save us, Splash of Starlight said. We are asking you to help us save ourselves, and in doing so, perhaps we can all save the galaxy. Elena looked around at her bridge crew. She saw Captain Chen nod slightly. Commander Park gave her an encouraging smile. Through the speakers, Dr. Kim's voice was soft but clear. Elena, this is what we always hoped for. Not gratitude or apologies, but real change. Elena made her decision. I cannot speak for all of humanity, she said, echoing words she had spoken to Zafira months earlier. But I can tell you this. We never wanted to abandon the galaxy. We wanted to be part of something better. She paused, looking directly at Zephyra's damaged but determined form. If you are truly committed to building a civilization based on equality and mutual respect, then humanity will consider joining your galactic cooperative. But understand this, we will not accept anything less than full partnership. No species is superior to any other. No civilization gets to decide the worth of another based on age or technology. Agreed, said every delegate simultaneously, their various translators creating a chorus of different voices saying the same word. Elena smiled for the first time in months. Then let's talk about how to defeat some machines. The planning session that followed lasted for hours. Species that had barely spoken to each other under the old hegemony now shared tactical knowledge, resource locations, and strategic insights. The Zarathi revealed hidden manufacturing capabilities. The Narid offered underwater bases the Devourers had never found. The Lightbringers shared centuries of anti-machine warfare experience. And humanity offered what they had always offered, the willingness to stand together with anyone who would treat them as equals. As the session ended, Zephyr remained on screen after the other delegates had left. Elena, she said quietly, I want you to know that your armor still sits in the ceremony hall on Concordia Station. We have kept it exactly as you left it. Why? Elena asked. As a reminder, Zephyr replied. A reminder that some things once lost cannot be easily recovered. But perhaps with enough effort and understanding, they can be rebuilt into something even better. Elena nodded. Soon she would return to galactic space. But this time, she would come as humanity's representative to a community of equals, not as a supplicant to uncaring masters. The galaxy was about to learn what humans could accomplish when they were treated with the respect they had always deserved. The first joint operation of the new galactic cooperative took place 6 months after Elena's return to civilized space. She stood on the bridge of the Defiance, watching the combined fleet prepare for battle against the largest Devourer force ever assembled. Around her flagship, ships from dozens of species moved in perfect coordination. Sleek, neared vessels designed for underwater combat worked alongside sturdy Zarathi hive ships. The geometric craft of the Lightbringer tribes flew in formation with human destroyers that looked primitive but carried crews with hearts full of determination. Gaul units report ready for operation, announced Commander Park from her station. The target is the Devourer command nexus in the Kelmar system. Intelligence suggests this is their central processing hub for this entire galactic invasion. Elena nodded, studying the tactical display. The Kelmar system had once been home to 3 billion Keith civilians. Now it was a machine factory converting everything into more Devourer units. Today they would take it back. Ambassador Zephyra's status of the Veltar reconstruction ships? Elena asked from her position near the communication station. Zephyra's rebuilt crystal form pulsed with steady blue light. She had refused offers to replace her damaged sections with more modern materials, preferring to show her scars as reminders of the cost of arrogance. Veltar crystalline technology is ready to provide shield harmonics for the entire fleet, Zephyr replied. We will protect all ships equally as equals should. Elena smiled at those words. The change in Zephyra had been remarkable to witness. The proud, dismissive diplomat had become a thoughtful leader who asked for input from every species before making decisions. Zarathi assault coordinators. Report hive tactics are synchronized with human boarding strategies, added another voice over the communications. The speaker was Queen Mother of 10,000, the Zarathi leader, who had replaced their old hierarchical council with a democratic collective. Elena looked out at the combined fleet and felt something she had not experienced in years: hope for the future of galactic civilization. Lightbringer tribal councils confirm anti-machine weapons are distributed to all vessels, reported Swiftrunner between stars from his scout ship. Ancient knowledge combined with new cooperative tactics. The machines will not understand what they face. The battle began when the cooperative fleet dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of the Kelmar system. Immediately, Devourer ships moved to intercept them. The machines outnumbered the organic fleet 3-1. But numbers had never been the only factor in determining victory. Human vessels initiate boarding protocols, Elena commanded. Narid units begin underwater assault on the factory moon. Sarai forces deploy hive coordination tactics. Veltar ships maintain shield harmonics. Lightbringer scouts begin hit-and-run attacks on machine command vessels. What happened next was unlike any battle the galaxy had ever seen. Human crews flew their ships directly into Devourer formations, not to ram them, but to deliver boarding parties that fought with courage and determination the machines could not calculate. Elena watched her tactical display as human soldiers established beachheads inside enemy vessels, holding positions long enough for Zarathi technical specialists to disable critical systems. The Nereid forces approached problems from directions the machines had never considered. Their ships could operate in liquid environments, allowing them to attack underwater factories the Devourers had built on ocean worlds. Working in perfect coordination with human marines, they cleared facility after facility. Veltar crystal technology proved perfect for disrupting machine communications. Their ships projected energy fields that interfered with Devourer coordination protocols. For the first time since the machine invasion began, the enemy forces started making tactical mistakes. But it was the Lightbringer hit-and-run tactics that proved most effective. Swiftrunner's people had been fighting machines for centuries, and they knew how to exploit the one weakness artificial intelligence could never overcome: the inability to understand irrational behavior. Lightbringer ships would attack in patterns that made no logical sense, drawing Devourer forces out of position. Then humans, Arai, and Nereid vessels would strike at the exposed weak points. The machines tried to calculate optimal responses to tactics that followed no mathematical rules. Elena called Dr. Kim from the science station. The enemy is adapting more slowly than usual. Their response time to new tactics has increased by 40%. Elena understood why the Devourers were machines designed to fight civilizations based on hierarchy and fear. They could predict how species would behave when fighting to preserve their dominance or avoid destruction. But they had no programming for beings who fought out of love, friendship, and mutual respect. The human crews who risked their lives to save wounded Zarathi pilots made no logical sense to machine intelligence. The Nereid commanders who shared critical resources with Veltar vessels instead of hoarding them for their own species violated every rule of survival. The machines understood most confusing of all was the sight of former enemies working together by choice rather than force. The machines could not compute why a Cathra engineer would sacrifice his life to save a Lightbringer scout, or why a Lightbringer diplomat would choose to shield a human transport instead of preserving her own vessel. As the battle progressed, Elena found herself working more closely with Zephyra than she had ever imagined possible. The Veltar ambassador had positioned herself on the Defiance's bridge, coordinating shield harmonics with human tactical decisions. "Elena," Zephyra said during a brief break in the fighting, "I want you to know that I understand now what you offered us a year ago. It was not just trade agreements or military cooperation. You offered us friendship." Elena glanced at her former adversary. "What made you finally understand?" "Watching my people work alongside yours," Zephyr replied. "Seeing Veltar engineers teaching human technicians how to harmonize crystal frequencies. Watching human medics risk their lives to save wounded Veltar soldiers. This is what cooperation looks like when it is based on respect rather than hierarchy." An alarm interrupted their conversation. Commander Park's voice was tense with urgency. "Elena, the Devourer command nexus, is preparing to self-destruct. If it detonates, it will take out half our fleet." Elena studied the tactical display. The machine central processor was a massive structure at the heart of the Kelmar system. Its destruction would the Devourer forces in this region, but the explosion would be enormous. "Distance to minimum safe range?" Hina asked. 12 minutes at maximum speed," Park replied. "Estimated time to detonation 8 minutes. Elena felt the weight of command settle on her shoulders. The logical choice was to retreat and preserve the fleet. But logic was not the only factor in human decision-making. "All ships, this is Elena Vasquez," she announced on the fleet-wide communication channel. "The enemy is preparing to self-destruct their command base. We can retreat to safety, or we can stay and make sure their sacrifice counts for something." She paused, looking around at the bridge crew that had followed her into exile and back again. Every transport in this system is loaded with beings who have been enslaved by the machines. If we retreat now, they die with the command nexus. If we stay and continue rescue operations, some of us might not make it out. Elena expected to hear arguments, calculations of acceptable losses, demands for more time to find a safer solution. Instead, every voice on the communication channel said the same thing: "We stay." The next 8 minutes were the longest of Elena's life. Human, Zarathi, Nereid, Veltar, Lightbringer, and Cathra vessels raced against time to rescue enslaved populations from the doomed facilities. Ships that should have been fleeing toward safety instead flew deeper into danger. Their crews focused entirely on saving lives. With 30 seconds left before detonation, the last rescue ship cleared the blast zone. Elena watched the tactical display as the Devourer command nexus exploded in a burst of energy that lit up the entire system. When the light faded, the machine forces in the region had lost their central coordination. Devourer ships drifted without purpose, their artificial intelligence unable to function without commands from the destroyed nexus. The battle was won, but more importantly, something new had been proven. A civilization based on mutual respect and cooperation could defeat enemies that seemed impossible to overcome. Later, as the combined fleet returned to cooperative space, Elena stood with Zafira on the observation deck of the Defiance. Through the transparent aluminum windows, they could see ships from every member species flying together in perfect formation. "What did you learn during humanity's year away from the galaxy?" Zafira asked, echoing her own question from their first communication. Elena smiled, remembering her response from that day, that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is walk away, and that the right people will always come looking for you when they're ready to treat you right. Zephra's crystal form pulsed with warm, steady light. "And we did come looking, didn't we?" "Yes," Elena replied, watching the stars ahead. "You did." In the cargo bay of the Defiance, Elena's ceremonial armor sat in a place of honor,